is about the 2-minute warning. 2 more minutes and we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you again for everyone's time and thank you for coming out tonight. All right, good evening, everyone. It is 7:01, and to respect everybody's time, we're going to go ahead and get started. First and foremost, I'm Dannika Rynes. I am the communications manager here for Columbia Association, and I just wanted to thank everyone for coming out tonight. Your time is very valuable, and to spend it with us really means something, so we really appreciate it. Also want to say happy Diwali to our friends and neighbors out there, our entire community. And again, thank you for taking time in your day of celebration to be with us here. So I want to go over a few housekeeping notes in case you haven't been with us for one of these sessions before. Welcome. First and foremost, we are using Zoom webinar tonight. It might look a little bit different than some of the other things that you've seen in the past. So quickly, I'll just go over the functions. We are going to use the Q&A tonight. So if you go to the bottom of your screen, you will see a little box with a speech bubble. That's the Q&A. And that's where if you do have questions that you would like for our panelists to answer, our presenters here, please drop them there. I will be moderating tonight. I'm going to do my best to get to everybody's question. However, I'm going to also do my best to combine questions when they are super similar. So if you don't hear your question verbatim, hopefully we can at least get a few questions kind of in one and present them to the panel in that way and kill a couple birds with one stone, so to speak. So again, please be patient with us as we try to move through those. We also had quite a few pre-submitted questions on our survey. If you haven't gone over to there, you can find that at columbiaassociation.org/budget. columbiaassociation.org/budget is where you can find that online survey. And we'll try to take some of those into consideration as well. We did have quite a few people register for tonight, though, so we do expect a lot of live Q&A. So we're going to take that into consideration. There's also a chat function available. I would ask that that be used for technical problems. If you can't see or hear one of us, can't see one of our presentations or slides that are popping up on the screen, that'll help us kind of separate the questions that we need to answer from just comments and technical things that we need to address. So I appreciate that. Really quickly, want to go over just what you're going to see tonight. And this information session is really to explain what is a really important and often complex process for our board and for this Columbia Association staff here, which is the budget. We're talking about fiscal year 2023, which starts next May, just for a little bit of context there. We'll get a lot more into it as we go along. As you'll hear throughout tonight, nothing we present or none of the things you hear tonight are any sort of official proposal. We're not here to take a stance. We're not here to give a recommendation. And I know that can be a little strange when we're talking about scenarios, right? But this is really an informational exercise. It's a chance for us to explore the what ifs in some of these scenarios and really look at the trade-offs and priorities that we want to look at for the upcoming budget. And we, of course, appreciate you being a part of that process. As you can see, maybe in the Brady Bunch boxes, as I like to call them, CA leaders are here tonight to provide some context, right, of where we are in this process, because that's really important, what the board of directors is considering at this stage of the process, and then where do we go? Where do we go next? How do we take this to the next place? So quickly, I am going to go around and just quickly introduce, and you'll hear more from all of them later. All of our presenters tonight are our panelists. Lakey Boyd is our president and CEO. Susan Krabbe is our senior vice president and CFO. Mattey is the Vice President of Community Operations. Dan Burns is the Vice President of Community Programs and Services. And I believe, oh, there she is. I wanted to make sure, sorry, I've got two screens going. Lynn Schwartz is here as well. She's the Director of Finance, and she and her team are primarily responsible for putting this, very complex and thorough document together as far as the budget goes. So we thank Lynn for all of that. Want to just stress right off the top that you are more than welcome, and please, please, please share your feedback throughout this entire process. We are really thankful that you're here tonight, getting your voice heard and getting your questions answered, and getting a little more information about this process that does look a little bit different this year. The last thing I'll throw in there before turning it over to Lakey is just to say that we are all here, out of a place of respect for one another, and I ask that we keep it that way in all of the forums that we have open, both the chat and the Q&A tonight. We are here to hopefully provide some more information for you, and we appreciate everybody being respectful as we do that. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Lakey.
Thank you, Dannika. Again, I'm Lakey Boyd, President and CEO, and I actually just had my 6-month anniversary yesterday. So I have been here exactly 6 months, and very excited about my time already. This obviously has been a big focus, is not just preparing for the next budget year, but putting together a new process that we hope is transparent, opportunity for engagement, and ideally easier to understand as well. So I too want to echo happy Diwali, and I guess I would say, from friends in my circles that celebrate this holiday, may this Diwali light up your hopes and your dreams. So best wishes, and as Dannika said, if you're sharing this time with us tonight, thank you. If you're watching it another time, I hope you had a great Diwali celebration. So I do also want to echo the thanks. I asked Lynn Schwartz, our Director of Finance, to be here. She is going to weigh in during Q&A, and she really leads the team, as well as the other people you see on the screen, to put this effort together. And it is a significant lift, and we could not do it without that collaboration across multiple departments and teams to make it happen. So thank you to everyone across CA that has gotten us here this evening. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. Let me know, Dannika, if we have any issues. Slideshow. Okay, can you see that?
And it is showing your view there, Lakey. So if there's any way to show the view for the presentation, that would be awesome.
That would be substantially better, I agree. Okay. It's still showing presenter view.
It is showing presenter view. I'm happy to take over if need be.
Okay, let me try one more time, and if not,
thanks everybody for your patience. It doesn't matter how often you rehearse this.
It does not. I agree with you.
Showtime, something will go wrong.
Okay. Okay, how's that one?
That looks great.
I'm seeing some thumbs up. Now we're going. Okay, let's jump into it. So I just wanted to quickly lay out kind of how we're going to move through the information. I'm going to give a quick framework and overview. Susan is going to talk through kind of an organizational level view. Then Dennis and Dan are going to go through their departments. And then we really want to make sure that we have the majority of the time on Q&A and discussion. And then I'll circle back and do a very quick next steps kind of from here. So if you're here tonight, you have some clue about this graphic, I assume, right? So it's always good to kind of orient to where we are in the process. So it is indeed November 4th, and we are having our community session. I do want to just quickly touch on the budget process changes have really been oriented around more engagement and frankly, some more flexibility around how the variables work together and their interconnectedness. So we started a little bit differently than traditionally CA has. We didn't start with the decision of what are called the parameters, so kind of the total budget number. And then the board of directors is who put together what we're calling these scenario test cases in a work session in July. And so from this point forward, we'll predominantly be in board meetings, but we will have another opportunity for feedback. We have online feedback open now. December is really where we'll get closer to a draft budget. You'll see that in January. And then February is when it will get voted on and approved by the board of directors. So scenario test cases, we have labeled this pre-budget scenario test cases, which is super easy to say and just super clear. And it's really to try to, as Dannika already said in the intro, this is not a final budget. What it is the board of directors really wanted to kind of pull apart some numbers that had not necessarily been easily understood across the organization, get better visibility into some programs and operations. And we just have to be real that the test cases thus are built on a lot of assumptions and estimates. That's just kind of baked into how these kind of processes work. So I will echo, we are not at staff recommendations. We are not at a full draft budget at this point. And there are a lot of complex assumptions. And so I'm not going to deep dive on these. We actually did discuss them in more detail at the last board of directors meeting. But I think that what's really important to understand is that CA has a lot of interconnected operations that we have a lot of complexity across the organization in what we do and, you know, what administrative services might support or what HR might support. And yet what is directly attributable to a certain program or team. And so in order to pull those numbers apart, we obviously are making some assumptions. We're going to be as clear as we can tonight about what those assumptions are. But I want to give you kind of a flavor of, even when we talk about what are fixed costs, right? There's the question of what makes Columbia, Columbia? Is that what CA really has to focus on? There are assumptions in here that could result in membership impacts, that could result in, say, facility closures. Well, those are things that would have to be fully modeled out. In some cases would take multiple years to implement. And so the way to think about this information is really snapshots that help you better understand it for the sake of comparison. But to get to a super detailed level, that's really what we're going to be doing as we move forward through the budget process. I think the other thing to bring up that I have heard in my time here is this idea of, well, you know, obviously we own a lot of real estate, 3,600 acres. We own a lot of facilities. This idea, well, what if something closed, we could sell it. So I think one of, just I'll quickly touch on, is that a lot of our land is actually credited open space, including land that has buildings on it that you might go into on a weekly basis. So the idea of, could that sell, or how could it be reused? Again, those are just very complicated and complex matters that would take more time and probably multiple years to kind of play out. So I just want to be very clear about that what we're going to show you tonight is to illustrate understanding, but it doesn't tie everything up in a bow with a level of detail that some people want. And in other cases, we might give you more detail than you might want. So we're trying to hit the middle ground. So I'm going to kind of run through the big moves around our scenarios and assumptions. I do want to point out, probably a lot of people are aware, Howard County has pre-filed at the beginning of October. There is a bill going in front of County Council to raise the minimum wage in Howard County above the state of Maryland. And it would start to impact organizations of our size in January 2022, which is actually this current fiscal year. I just want to clearly state that at this moment in time, those assumptions are not included. They will be integrated as we move forward. We're actually reporting some of those impact analysis numbers next week to our board of directors. Okay, so test case number 1. This is the closest to kind of keeping things as they are at CA, but definitely with still some forward movement. So want to be clear that we would be back up to open space, parks and pathways, fully operated and maintained. Obviously, there had been some cuts around that this past fiscal year in the pandemic. The goal is absolutely to open all 23 outdoor pools this summer. We will be returning either fully at pre-pandemic programs and services or pretty close. Some are a little slower than others in the rebuild, and part of that frankly has to do with still a lot going on around youth and continued regulations there. Absolutely a renewed focus. This is very important to me towards employee retention, making sure that we are valuing, rewarding, and compensating current employees, but also getting better at our recruiting efforts, both in terms of diversity, but also in terms of getting people in the door and getting them to be part of the CA team and happy to be here. And part of that will be continued training as something that helps improve skill sets. We will continue to increase engagement in events. We're doing that in a few different ways. And then hopefully you have already seen, tonight is a good example, but continuing improvements across our communications channels and in particular digital marketing as well. And then lastly, cybersecurity is a significant issue for us in terms of obviously a lot of property information, financial information, membership. So keeping that safe is critically important. So test case number 2 is where we start to have some changes. So the board asked for us to have all of the paying programs, so membership or fee-based, outside of outdoor pools, be able to self-sustain, but not have to cover their fixed cost administrative allocations. And so what that means is a pretty typical nonprofit structure, where often the overhead is kind of what is subsidized. So everything I just said about scenario 1 stays true. And then what is self-sustaining under a true not-for-profit structure, frankly, is most of our programs. And the way you have to think about that is that we're really underwriting overhead, and we're also making a priority to subsidize access, to make sure that we are offering opportunities with income qualifications so that we can ensure equity access. And that's critically important. The programs that are not self-sustaining, frankly, probably are not terribly surprising, but they're often the ones that, you know, community members tell us absolutely add the most value. So around arts, around culture, some around our youth and teen programming, our swim center and outdoor pools. And we'll dig into that a little bit more, but again, I'm trying to give a high level view here. And then lastly, our test case number 3 is saying that everything has to be self-sustaining except outdoor pools. We're going to make outdoor pools free for all residents. So that really is a whole different ballgame, a very different approach than what we are currently doing. So I think a few things to think about here is the maximum capacity of pools means that we would be at increased staffing and security. And what we really mean by that is crowd control. The size that our pools can accommodate versus what visits we normally get is very different. Now, does that mean we would be at maximum capacity every day? Not necessarily, but part of what we have to do in estimates is really figure out what would that impact be. We do know it would have an impact on memberships, because obviously that's part of our membership package is the access to outdoor pools. How would non-residents respond to that, which is actually quite a bit of people that access our outdoor pools. I want to be very clear that this would have a multi-year impact on programming and potentially on facilities and operations, because we would putting a large amount of our annual charge towards the outdoor pools. And because we would be removing some of that benefit, there's a big cascading effect of people on memberships and program revenue. And then lastly, one of the things that we are putting forward as a way to address that is increasing the annual charge. And I'll go through that in just a moment. One thing I wanted to quickly run through, because I think sometimes it's not always clear what our revenue streams are. And we have approximately 65 million. This is our current year, fiscal year 22. And I want to point out that our annual charge comes in two different ways. One, through residential payers, which is approximately 27.6 million. But then we have 15.4 million that come in through commercial property payers. So our annual charge is both residential and commercial. Sometimes I think that is not fully understood. We also have revenue from memberships at approximately 12.3. And then our program tuition fees, anything that you pay for a class or like school age services, that kind of thing, is right at 10 million. So we have multiple levers, as I would describe it, that could shift and change to shift our revenue sources. And so you'll hear our reference to that tonight. One of those is annual charge, one of those is programs, and one of those is memberships. So one of the key assumptions that's important to highlight that really is a shift in scenario 3, which is the free outdoor pools, is that we are currently at an annual charge rate of 68 cents and a charge cap at 3.5%. That stays true in scenario 1 and 2. Scenario 3, we are saying in order to make up the difference, so to speak, it would go to 74%. Again, this is at this point not a recommendation. It's how could you make this work? I do want to point out that we have concerns that this would get very close to the maximum, and that obviously doesn't allow a lot of wiggle room, which is definitely a concern for staff going forward. But again, there's two levers here. There's the rate and then there's the charge cap. My understanding is historically, we actually have been in the 70s previously, but I think it was 16 years ago is my understanding. So many years ago at this point, but it has happened. So just as a quick reference, if you're new like me. And then lastly, I do want to, we're actually going to spend a little time talking about kind of our departments, but I do want everyone to be clear that we've had some realignment at CA, but in a lot of ways, it just is kind of lining things up in a way that I believe is more intuitive for community understanding. So community operations is largely the group that most people know as open space. But here's the thing, Dennis and his team do so much more than that. And so it's really trying to get across all the different types of services that are included there. And he'll talk more in detail about that. And then community programs and services is what largely had been known as kind of sports and fitness, and then also community services. But at the end of the day, those are all programs and services that make up the spectrum of our quality of life, community-oriented services that CA offers. And there's a lot that we can leverage and a lot more synergy we can gain by thinking of those as all types of community programs and services. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Dannika to transition us to the next section, but thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Lakey. And we're going to next go to Susan. And Susan, actually, before you start your presentation, not to put you on the spot, but this is actually a great transition. Bill was just wondering for some clarification if either you or Lakey might be able to explain annual charge rate, annual charge cap, and kind of give a little more context to what that means in more layman's terms.
Sure, that is a great question. So I just also would say good evening and happy Diwali to those who are celebrating this evening, and appreciate, as Lakey said, you spending the time with us on an important day, so thanks. So just to address or try to clarify the annual charge. So the annual charge has two components. It's a rate, it's a dollar amount applied to a value, and the rate is the currently 68 cents per $100 of assessed valuation. So it can go up to 75 cents, as Lakey noted. The cap is the amount by which a property owner's annual valuation can increase from year to year under most circumstances. So that cap is actually set by through legislation at 10%. It was established in, I think, about 2003 or 2004, retroactive to 2003, and it was immediately lowered to 5%. And then it's been lowered a couple times, increased to 3.5 a few years ago. And it's just the amount that your annual charge valuation or your property valuation can increase. It's like the homestead tax credit is at 10%. The county has it at 5%. So it's similar, just limits how much it can go up every year. Okay.
Thank you, Susan.
Sure. So I wanted to give kind of a CA-wide overview. First of all, I think it would be really helpful for our community to have an assessment and just get an update on CA's financial position. So when last we talked like this, it was almost a year ago, and still in the throes of a pandemic and pre-vaccine, and things are while we did really well last year, we're in even better shape. So last fiscal year, that's 2021, ending April 30, we had an excellent audit, unqualified, clean opinion, and the audited financials are posted on our website under the financial section. So you can check those out. Positive bottom line, finished the fiscal year better than expected. And that was a couple, just strategically and intentionally managing expenses. And also the revenue, growing the revenue a little bit faster than we expected, especially for programs like golf and tennis. So we're seeing recovering revenue on membership sales. We're not at pre-pandemic levels, but we're definitely improving as people are more and more comfortable coming out and using our facilities and programs. The annual charge revenue is strong. A lot of local governments and those of us are reliant on those property valuations. We're very concerned at the beginning of the pandemic, and those that their values would decrease. But in reality, especially in Howard County, the property values remain very stable and actually increase, especially on the residential side. So we had anticipated and some commercial negative indications, some commercial abatements, applications for reductions in value, and those have not appeared as significantly as we expected. And also, CA's in very solid cash position. We had the cash generated from operations was strong, better than the previous year. We managed and really reduced our capital investment, which is only a temporary measure. That's not sustainable long term, but we we felt that was prudent in the short run. And we got new financing in June of 2020 that was in very favorable terms. And then also the CA board approved the establishment of an emergency cash reserve, and we made the initial $2 million investment in that for this fiscal year. So the organization is in solid, fine financial shape. You know, no one knows what the future will hold or how people will behave, you know, as this pandemic continues to roll out, but we're doing well. And then we do have the same challenges as you do, and as every other employer and organization really is facing. And that's supply chain. It's you know, getting things from pool plaster to sprinkler heads to many elements of construction, fiberglass bridges, all kinds of things are in, you know, very long delays. And also hiring. There's definitely difficulty in recruiting. We saw that this summer with the pools. We wanted to open at another one, and we couldn't staff it. So hence the emphasis on the current in the scenarios, especially scenario 1 and the baseline one, on employee recruiting and retention. Okay, so these colorful pictures are a representation of where the income comes and how it comes in from the sources and how it's used. And so these are scenarios 1 and 2. These are in the packet. That's the backup to last week's agenda, 2-1. And these are just showing that obviously the annual charge combined, residential and commercial, is the single largest component. And then following that is community programs and services. So we did show outdoor pools separately. So where it says pools at 2.7 million at the top of the income, that is just outdoor pools. So on the right, where did the money go, or where would we predict that it would go under these scenarios? Community operations, the programs and services is the biggest single piece, and then what you might expect, our capital investment, $5 million, $5.3 million to the villages, and so on. So why are scenarios 1 and 2 the same? And that's because, or why are the results the same? Because overall, community programs and services cover their changeable expenses, and that was the charge of scenario 2. So the rates that we would have had to charge for the things for the individual programs that didn't would be just unrealistic from a market standpoint. So we didn't even run those out. So that's why these 2 scenarios are the same. Okay, scenario 3, different. We show if we look first at the spending, we see that the outdoor pools this cost increase, and to make up those differences, and is the annual charge revenue on the left. So our assumptions were that we would lose membership income, and certainly we would, because a resident wouldn't need a play membership to access the outdoor pools. And so those and other factors resulted in the outcomes for scenario 3. So if you are like me and you really want to look at the numbers in detail, and you want to see the comparisons from year to year, and you want to dig into the materials that we provided the board and the community last week, you'll see that we changed our format, and we have classified expenses in a way that we hope will be a little clearer and help you see better how well facilities and programs are able to achieve that coverage, the charge of covering their changeable expenses. So the expenses are divided into those 2 categories, and changeable are the ones that, the expenses that are incurred to deliver a program or service. And they will vary depending on the size and the duration of the program. So for example, if we provide school age services, there'll be supplies and staffing that will be incurred in those to provide those services, but they're not fixed. They're only incurred if we provide those services. And then they're not expenses that would be required by a commitment, like a lease or a contract, or what is necessary to maintain CA's fixed assets, our buildings and open space. So Fixed and administrative, obviously, we have to bill and collect that annual charge. We have to maintain the open space, so there's personnel costs related to that and supplies, utilities, repairs and maintenance. There would be organizational leadership. We'd still be required to do audits and to have payroll processes, et cetera. So we would have to minimally maintain the community services, programs and services buildings. We'd still own those buildings. Now, as Lakey said, they most of them are subject to use kind of restrictions by being credited open space, and we're obligated, as a community steward, to maintain those buildings to some minimal level. And then we'd also be supporting the village community associations, their annual charge share grant, the operating expenses that we incur on and pay for on their behalf. And then CA-wide, we'd have insurance, taxes, interest, depreciation, et cetera. So this is just a chart, a visual representation of what I just ran through in words. So it's presenting what would be the sort of fixed income, which would be the annual charge. There's some rental, some lease income, a little bit of interest income, et cetera. And then those expenses related to running the buildings, owning the buildings, keeping them maintained, maintaining open space, and the administrative processes that would need to be in place to make those things happen. Okay, the next one. So big picture results. The scenarios, test cases 1 and 2 resulted in an increase in net assets, or net total, net income less expenses of $3.4 million. Down 19% compared to the FY22 estimate. And why would it go down? Because of increased spending that would outpace the revenue earned, and outdoor pools up to 23 from 16 last year. Increased staffing in a lot of areas, and bringing open space up to fully staffed and operational. Events. There are events included in the FY23 scenario test cases that were not included in FY22, and more free programming, really. International programs are back in here, more robust operations for the Art Center, et cetera. So scenario 3 goes down. It's $3.0 million. We kind of set that as the sort of baseline increase in net assets that we think that our external users, our credit community, the banks and the lenders could tolerate, and that is about 29% below the estimate. And again, that's the impact of the free outdoor pools, and a little bit, the first year impact of the spiraling kind of through the organization that would create. And I think that's it.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Susan. I know some of you are throwing in your questions. We will certainly roll back around to them. Once we get to that, I want to make sure we have all the context in place. Bill's was kind of an exception because it was very specific in defining things as we went along. So I'm going to turn it over now to Dennis Mattey.
So thank you, Dannika. So community operations really comes down to 3 things: land, buildings, and people. And I have several buckets, but there is a lot of crossover between those buckets. Next slide. So open space facilities and building grounds. So those are the places that aren't really open to the general public on a normal basis, but have to be maintained. Areas around the facilities, the RV storage park, the dog park, those kinds of places. Parks, pathways, those are pretty self-evident. Playgrounds, it's 95 miles of pathways and 173 tot lots, and we have 8 tennis court facilities, basketball courts, and on and on. Event services. So we support the 4th of July, we support the Veterans Day Parade, we support a number of smaller events at the facilities. Sustainability, that is our watershed efforts, that is energy, that's the 22% reduction in energy usage at the Columbia facilities over the last couple of years. And that's also about resident interaction and volunteer programs. Real estate services, That is about everything about the land. That's encroachments, that's easements, that's questions we get from homeowners about, hey, where is, this is my backyard. There might be a tree that's an issue. Real estate services is involved in all of that. So scenario one, it's full return to pre-COVID positions, non-personnel expenses at pre-COVID levels, aquatic vegetation harvesting and tot lot maintenance to increase, an uptick in that, all other maintenance to be consistent with pre-COVID activities, and then a full return of events and community engagement activities, which we didn't have this past summer. Scenario two and scenario three are the same for us. So there is a $19.3 million subsidy for community operations. It's about a 9% increase, and most of that is in personnel costs. The capital program is geared mostly towards repairs, maintaining existing buildings, and also open space assets. We spend money on pathways, on tot lots, on parks, in addition to which we reinvest in facilities, but most of that at this point in time is repair-based and not new stuff. And there is a 20% increase in the capital budget for FY23 over FY22. So scenario one requires an annual subsidy of $19 million, which is the same in all three scenarios, and the capital budget is the same across all three as well.
Thank you, Dennis. A quick run through there. You caught me a little off guard. I looked off for 1 second and you were good to go. Going to turn it over now to Dan Burns to talk a little bit more about community programs and services.
Thank you, Dannika. Excuse me. First, I want to make sure I wish all the members of our community celebrating Happy Diwali today. And again, like others have said, thank you for joining us. If you're watching right now and if you're watching later, we hope you had an enjoyable day. Community programs and services, I like to think it's diverse, just like our community. We do a lot of different things within the department, and find many different ways to serve our communities. Wellness and fitness, that covers our three athletic facilities, the Supreme Sports Club, Columbia Gym, and Athletic Club, and houses three of our indoor pools. And our sports, we have our ice rink, and pay attention, the annual Nutcracker show is going to be coming up soon. It's coming back this year. Our two golf courses, Fairway Hills and Hobbits Glen. Fairway Hills also houses our First Tee program, which serves the youth of Howard County, not only teaching them golf, but also critical life skills and development. Our tennis program, which covers both indoor and outdoor, indoor at the Athletic Club and the Long Reach Tennis Center, and outdoors at Hobbits Glen Courts, Wild Lake, and Owen Brown. Our outdoor pools, which we've already mentioned and we'll mention again, we're hoping to return all 23 this coming summer. Our mini golf, Sports Park and Mini Golf, which if you missed it, mark your calendars. Last weekend was our second trunk or treat. We had over 2,000 participants. So it was the place to be on Saturday afternoon. So look for it next year. Then we have our youth and teen programs, which covers our school age services, and within the school age service program, it's before and after school daycare at 20 schools that we partner with the Howard County Public School System. And we have the capacity to handle over 2,000 kids a day. And we're really excited about that. Fully licensed daycare, and we receive a Maryland's Excel rating at all of our sites. So we're very happy to announce that. We also have our youth and teen center at the barn in Oakland Mills, serves our teens aged 19 to 18. Computer lab developmental programs, as well as just having a place for them to hang out and have fun with their friends. Our arts and culture, our art center, classes in ceramics, which they're kind of known for, We have a whole lot of kilns over there, many different types. Painting, mixed media, and glasswork. So a lot of exciting things there, as well as the gallery. And with the gallery, we've partnered with many organizations within Howard County for shows and opportunities to showcase to the community. Arts and culture also encompasses our international exchange and multicultural programming. That covers our 5 sister city programs. We had been doing student exchanges with our sister city programs, but obviously due to the pandemic, that's been on hold. But the programs are still alive and well, and there's still cultural exchange between the cities and Columbia. Our language cafes are back, give you the opportunity to practice a language or keep it in short order, or to just learn about different cultures. And then many other programs like our Culture Fest, which just allow us to showcase the different cultures of our community as well as the world, so everyone can experience them. And last but not least, our archives, the Columbia, Maryland Archives, which showcases the planning and development of Columbia and a bit of its history. And the exciting thing to note there is Erin, our archivist, launched a website and a digital catalog in October of 2020 to make the artifacts more accessible to the community. While everything is not digitized yet, we were working hard to make that happen, but there is a lot of information there. So it's going to take a little bit of time, but there is also a lot already available on the website. For the scenarios, the key assumptions we made for scenario 1 and scenario 2, as Susan pointed out, they're similar. As I already noted, to open all 23 outdoor pools with a full season of swim meets for the CNSL, the neighborhood swim league. Assumes a normal 3 to 5% increase in membership rates and an 8% growth in total memberships for FY23 over FY24. Pre-COVID facility hours at Columbia Athletic Club and Columbia Gym. The Arts Center will operate at about 75% of its pre-COVID capacity for classes and 50% for gallery shows. School-age services will open all sites with 30 children in each of the AM and PM sessions, and youth and teen drop-in programming will resume year-round. For scenario 3, we assumed additional lifeguards, pool managers, security guards to accommodate the projected increased usage. We had to make some really broad assumptions at this point on how memberships were going to be impacted. We assumed a 58% reduction in play membership income and a 33% reduction in fit and play membership income due to the various changes related to making the outdoor pools free for residents. Membership decrease would impact multiple facilities. The memberships that have like the fit and play, which include multiple facilities, that revenue is shared across those facilities. And so decreasing that would cause, as Lakey had pointed out, kind of a ripple effect across other facilities. And as also was covered, the annual charge would increase to cover the free pools for the residents. Okay, this is a fun little chart, so pay attention. I hope everybody's had their coffee and is awake. We're going to focus on 2 lines on each of the 2 graphs. On the top one for scenario 1 and 2, really what this is when Susan talked about the changeable and the fixed expenses. The middle line where you see the green box with the 2,179. What's important to know here is from the scenario 2 where the facilities were required to cover their changeable expenses, the boxes in green, the wellness and fitness, sports, and school aid service all do substantially cover their changeable expenses. The ones boxed in red, outdoor pools, art center, and youth and teen services do not cover their changeable expenses, but as an aggregate, they all cover as a group, as a whole department, they cover the changeable expenses. The box at the bottom of that, that category is when all of the changeable and the fixed expenses are added in scenario 1 and 2, and you can see only school aid services, which coincidentally does not have any property because we use the Howard County Public Schools, is the only program or division that covers its total expenses under scenario 1 and 2. The bottom box represents scenario 3, which is the free outdoor pools. And with the free outdoor pools, that changes, as we said, some of the income levels across the facilities. So again, the middle boxes represent covering the changeable expenses. And you can see now we've moved from half of the divisions covering their expenses to now only sports and school aid services covering their changeable expenses, and wellness and fitness outdoor pools, art center, and youth and teen do not cover those expenses. But the actual requirement for scenario 3 was to cover all of the expenses, both the changeable and the fixed. And with the reduced income, we can see that only school aid services is able to cover all of those costs for under the requirement of scenario 3. And a high level summary, for community programs and services, less outdoor pools, we've separated that out. This is everything in community programs and services except outdoor pools. The net decrease in net assets for scenario 1 and 2 is a negative $6.7 million, which is an improvement of 17% over FY22 estimate. For scenario 3, with the decrease in revenue and the outdoor pools for free, that changes to a negative $9.5 million, which is negative 18% change compared to the FY22 estimate. For the outdoor pools, for the net change in under scenario 1 and 2, it's a negative $2.9 million, which is a negative change of 17%, as Lakey pointed out, and Susan I think did as well. That's substantially the change going from 16 outdoor pools to 23 outdoor pools is driving a lot of that change. For scenario 3 and making the outdoor pools for free for residents and the increased cost associated with it and membership changes, that changes to a negative $4.3 million, which is about a negative 73% change compared to the FY22 estimate. In summary, the projected outcomes for scenario 1, in total, department covers changeable expenses. But as I said, if you aggregate everything, add them all up, they all cover their changeable expenses. The proposed capital budget is $10 million across all 3 scenarios, as Dennis had noted. Scenario 2, no changes were made compared to scenario 1. And as I had indicated, several programs and facilities do not cover their changeable expense as required, but the price increases on programs and services was not practical to do so. We would have had to increase it so much, there wouldn't be any participation. So it wasn't practical to represent it. And outdoor pools would require an annual charge subsidy of $2.866 million. For scenario 3, outdoor pools would require an additional annual charge subsidy of $1.4 million, which, as indicated, one way put forth to solve that would be to increase the annual charge rate. Again, even more so than scenario 2, the user price increases to make facilities cover all of their expenses were not feasible or reasonable to put forward as a practical suggestion. And membership decreases, as I indicated, would impact multiple facilities because of the way the shared memberships are distributed across all of the different organizations.
All right, Dan, thank you. Everybody, deep breath. I know that was a lot to take in. It is, as I mentioned, a complex process, and finances are always a good time. So we appreciate you kind of going through the mud with us there. We do have some questions, and I'm going to start with what I think might be a Lakey-Susan combo, if you will, talking about these scenarios in general. So putting a little more context around those. So Michael was wondering, I think it's an important question because it makes us point out something important about these scenarios. Michael was wondering, once a scenario is chosen, will CA do an assessment of individual services and amenities at a more granular level to determine whether they can provide an effective return on investment for Columbia? And I think the key there to start with is once a scenario is chosen. So maybe Lakey, can you put some context around this board process with these scenarios first, and then we can maybe address the second part of the question?
Yes, and I realized I was still sharing, so maybe you can see us a little better. So I think that's a great question, and it gives me a good opportunity to clear up what I'm sure is a potential point of confusion. So the first part of the answer is our goal and where we are right now is not to have a selection, so to speak, of scenario 1, 2, or 3. It really was some different components that the board wanted to understand to test out, getting better visibility into kind of the operations, the expenses, the income. What I am going to forecast is likely to happen, and certainly in conversation with the board already, where we know we're headed, is some modification, either some blend of them, maybe now that we better understand, pick any program, but because it's not self-sustaining, oh my gosh, well, of course we still want the Arts Center, which I certainly hope, is the answer. I think that part of it's just starting to understand what are we doing on purpose. I think there's a lot going on in our budget that has been, we've kind of always done it. The pandemic created a lot of change out of necessity. So the first part of the answer is there isn't a intent to choose one of the ones being selected. I think what we're going to do by the time we get to December, we've got another conversation with the board and then kind of fleshing out what they want to prioritize us drafting. That happens in December, and that's when we get into what you were just saying, which is, yes, we will dig into more detail, and that will get refined over the course of the process. So December will really be, what do we want to flesh out more? What are the key decisions? What kind of modified scenario are we going to put forward? By January, that's when the draft budget will be shared with the public, and that's really when you will be able to view something that is pretty close to the final or is intended to be, and we'll have more of a role in staff recommendation and shaping at that point. And so again, at each stage, we'll actually do more refinement as we move forward.
Susan, anything you wanted to add to that before we move on to another related question?
No, I think Lakey hit the nail on the head there.
Great. So some people are asking, and I think this is pretty easily answered actually for Susan or Lakey. I'll probably pose it to either of you. Ray and I think some others as well. We're kind of curious why outdoor pools as opposed to anything else was selected to be free. Ray was particularly curious, making something free will increase its usage as well. There's some questions about that will be Dan's maybe forte here, but let's start with, why the pools?
Well, I'll take a stab at that. I'm the new kid. I can do that. So I think for a couple of reasons. One, I can clearly say was discussed in a board meeting, and then the other, I think, I'm making a little speculation based on what I've heard in the community. So I think in the board meeting, it was very explicitly brought forward that a few board members have heard, had community engagement that, why aren't pools free? Wasn't that the original intent even of Columbia, was to have free access? So I think that there are definitely some board members that I'm not going to say are saying that's what we must do, but felt like they get that question frequently enough, even just as a, I wonder what would happen if we did that, that it really was something they wanted to test to understand what would that mean? What does that really mean? So I think that's one part. I think the other part is, and again, this is kind of my interpretation, but it's based on certainly information I've seen. I think that the outdoor pools, particularly because they were closed during the pandemic and we weren't, able to staff to open all of them last summer, I think it really became a factor, a program that a lot of people identify as a very critical piece of the community connective fabric during the summer in Columbia. And so I think that is one reason because, this question kind of posits, hey, I love the Art Center. I love before and after school care. I love the pathways. And that's really the beauty of CA, right? I mean, you can be interested in support CA and want to see investment in a lot of different components. But I think the outdoor pools came forward as a combination of the impact from the pandemic, not being able to open, and then partially opening. And then really, I have heard so much about the way that it really, for the people that do use the pools, which is certainly not everybody, really feel like it's almost like a community town square almost environment over the summer. So I think that's probably, in my opinion, why it came more forward. And then in a more distinct way, definitively, some board members in our work session voiced that they had heard that and really wanted to better, frankly, be able to answer it.
And I just want to reiterate something that Michael's question touched on, and Lakey, you probably touched on it, but just to kind of, because it was important for me to understand, is that these scenarios are not a choose one and move forward situation. Michael, you were asking about, when we choose a scenario or when the board chooses a scenario. The beauty of this exercise is because we are gathering so much different information, it is not a choose scenario 1, 2, or 3. It is okay, this part makes sense to us. This part makes sense to us. We're hearing this from the public and we're incorporating this. We're at an early stage in this process where we can do just that. And that is the point of this exercise. So I just wanted to kind of hit that home because I know that helped me personally kind of digest what's going on here. So, Dan, time to talk some more pools. Somebody anonymously asking here, how will we handle the usage and capacity issues? I know you touched on that a little bit, but maybe elaborate a little bit more on what we're expecting and how we are at least trying to project how to handle that.
That's a very good question. And we are working on that. There are a few pools now that we experience some where we reach capacities on the weekends and get very close. The pools do have capacity issues that are set by the fire marshal. So, under certain scenarios, and as Lakey indicated, there's additional staff and security needed more for crowd management. Because there will have to be occupancy limits, and we'll have to manage people in and people out at certain points at certain pools, and ultimately have to suggest they may have to use a different pool than the one they want to use. So there are still questions around that about the actual execution of it. But like I said, I can tell you from a few pools that we have now, where when it's warm out, we approach capacity and we have to be very diligent about managing it.
So somebody else is wondering, Dan, along the same thread, about opening all 23 pools. We had a scenario last year where we didn't have all 23 open. So, perhaps there's some other people who want to chime into this as well, but what was the thought process behind putting all 23 pools back on the table?
The community. I mean, I can sum it up in one word. You know, we heard loud and clear from the community the need for all the pools. We worked hard to try to open additional pools, as Lakey noted. We could not get staff. We managed to open one additional pool, but there were neighborhoods that felt left out, and not every pool was convenient in all circumstances. So, given the voice of the community, it was the right decision to move forward with.
Thank you, Dan. I want to acknowledge a couple folks who have more comments than questions, and I just want to make sure we're seeing them and acknowledging them about, we're using this term free pools for the third scenario, and there are some folks who say that is not free if we're seeing the annual charge go up, and that is an excellent point. It is just for the sake of understanding that trade-off, I think, is why we're using that term, but it is absolutely a great point. Alex making it for one, and somebody else as well throwing that in. So, any comments from the crew there? So far, any comments from the panel?
I would say I would wholeheartedly concur with that observation. I think that is very true. So we should probably, again, it's a lot more words to say residents would not have to pay a separate fee to go to the pool. But the reality is, of course, there's a cost somewhere and it is paid somewhere. So that is absolutely accurate. Yes.
Somebody was also asking, and I'll just pose this to everybody and see who wants to take this on. If we've been looking at any scenarios so far that made just some of the pools free, this anonymous attendee was saying that I know some of the underused pools have a cheaper entrance fee for CA resident cardholders. Have you looked at making those pools free? Maybe not under these scenarios, maybe otherwise, but anybody want to take a stab at that one?
I'll actually jump at that one first, Dan, just because there's one distinction I think is really, really critical. And you're going to hear us say it a lot because it's important to make sure everybody's clear. Again, the goal isn't to pick any one scenario per se, right? It's a blend. But I think this question, which equals a suggestion, is really, now this is Lakey, in my role as president and CEO, but kind of saying this is what I would kind of guess or maybe put forward a hypothesis that maybe the texture of what we really want to have a discussion around is how do we make the pools more accessible, right? That's likely the real origin of this question, right? Of why we even did this exercise. And could we do a better job at making the pools more accessible? I think the answer is absolutely. And there's probably a lot of ways we could do it. And that's actually a really good suggested way to do it. So I just wanted to generally answer, Dan, if you have anything you want to add to that.
That's pretty much what I was going to say, except for you were much more eloquent than I was.
Awesome. Susan, this one might be for you. Pools related. I'm staying on the pool thread until maybe we can move on to something else here. But somebody was wondering, would free pools be a permanent solution, or do you foresee a few years down the road that CA would have to charge for them again? And they added the caveat, thus invoking the wrath of the residents. I will leave it at, do you think we would have to charge for them again? And leave it at that. But Susan, would free pools be a permanent situation?
So I personally didn't foresee a global pandemic that would interrupt life as we know it for almost, going on 2 years. So I can't, and I'm a conservative, cautious financial person who would never say never. So I don't think we could, who knows? I mean, if the community really wanted that and it was something that continued to add value, then I'm sure the organization and the rest of the community would look for ways to continue to make that happen. But I don't think that we would say anything was permanent. We have to, especially in this environment of still in this pandemic and still in the it's got an awfully long tail on it, you know, as far as I can see. And so we have to just be very, very nimble, very flexible, and really evaluating things all the time. So I don't think anyone would want us to make that commitment either, frankly, at this point.
All righty. I promise we'll get off of pools soon, but I'll also say there was a lot of feedback in the survey as well for folks who wanted to know more about the pools and the trade-off in this third scenario that we put together. And Sherrod asked about something interesting. Dan, I think this goes to you, that has been hinted at in other folks who responded to our survey, and just about outdoor pools, opening them for free for the summer, and the consideration for the impact to year-round services such as, you know, they mentioned specifically the Clipper swim team, fitness centers, which promote good health. I think this may be an opportunity, Dan, to talk about the trade-offs here and what you were considering, what you saw while going through this scenario exercise.
Yeah, as I stated when I was going over the numbers, there are going to be significant trade-offs. You know, it's the exact number we don't know, because there is a lot of data mining that has to go in to figure out the true impact and what changes we would have to actually make to the memberships. As I said, we had to take some broad liberties with some assumptions in getting there in a short amount of time. But no matter what, there is going to be an impact. You could just say off the top, you know, for the Fit and Play membership, if we're giving pools free to the residents, then it's very difficult to continue to charge them the upcharge for the play membership. So if you just gave all residents the Fit membership without the play, without paying for the play, you know, they still get access to everything else. That's 23% of the Fit and Play revenue. It's not in that. Goes across all the facilities that are included. So it's substantial. And what that would ultimately trickle down to would be either we continue operating at a substantial loss, which we can't do, a greater loss, because the annual charge would have to increase more, but we're already at near the max, or the rates would have to go up so substantial. And I'll answer a question because I saw someone ask what was the difference between the language we used in scenario 2 and scenario 3, where scenario 2 was substantial increases, I think, and then scenario 3 was not feasible. And in scenario 3 or scenario 2, we modeled out a few things to make those few facilities that weren't covering their cost, their changeable cost. And with one exception, the changes, while not palatable, were within a realm of, okay, it's a 20% increase, it's a 30% increase. One facility, it was much more significant than that. But then when you get to scenario 3, then the increases become hundreds of percent of increase to start increasing, and it becomes substantial. So that's where the board would have to decide, you know, if fully scenario 3, which we've already discussed, is that's not how we're doing this, there would have to be some decisions made along those lines. And, you know, it was also mentioned earlier, you know, and it's not just across the other facilities for the rest of the year. There are other waterfall effects too. We talked about the overcrowding potential for the pools. Well, then what do you start doing with non-residents? And, you know, if you want to bring guests? And, you know, so there's a lot of decisions that will go into it. And I think Lakey said at the beginning, it's very complex. We are a tight community and everything is interconnected, and it's just not easy to pull one piece out and have everything. It's like playing Jenga. You know, we're at that point where you're pulling out one piece and the tower is going to change dramatically.
Yeah, absolutely. It is definitely all interconnected, and kind of going off that, Dan and Susan, feel free to chime in on this as well. You know, Bill was throwing in the mix something that you alluded to, Dan, which is that the scenarios do a pretty good job of describing the impact on assessment rate, memberships, but is there any indication what could happen to fees under each scenario? And I know we've been talking about membership a bit, but is there anything we can talk about when it comes to lessons, classes, et cetera, under these scenarios?
You know, that's what I was just kind of addressing, is that we didn't put them in because they weren't really palatable. Because what happens, the real challenge with these, and I said under scenario 2, you were seeing 20-some%, or somewhere in there, less than 50% increase. You know, and then in scenario 3, you were seeing hundreds, and in some cases 1,000% increase to try to generate the revenue. But then what ends up happening is you end up chasing your tail, really, and it's a race to zero, because as you increase the rates, less people participate. So then you have to increase the rates more. So then even less people participate. And so very quickly, if you even got them to overcome the first hurdle, the first increase in scenario 2, you've dropped off a lot of people. And so then, then we have to assume, okay, now we need to increase it even more to cover costs. So it's a difficult model to go out, but trust me, they were not single-digit % increases. They were double, triple, and in a few cases quadruple % rate increases in various places.
Susan, did you want to add anything to that? I mean, is there anything we can share with folks within these scenarios about, particular programs that might have seen some kind of those kind of potential increases? I know, again, I can't stress enough, these are all estimates, working with a lot of fluid numbers here and best guesses, because there are, as Dan mentioned, a lot of impacts that we just can't foresee in some of these scenarios until somebody were to go through it. So Susan, anything you want to add in that?
The only thing I would add is that we did not attempt in the time that we had to really take a hard look at the program aspects of the facilities impacted. So for example, we didn't look at what would be the impact on participation in fitness programs if people dropped their membership to a one fit. Would they no longer take a class at another gym that encouraged them to keep the multiple gyms and those things? I don't know, Dan, I don't think we looked at the impact on things like lessons at the pools with capacity challenges. So, and the programming there, like the fitness classes, the aqua fitness and stuff. So there are those things that, we just didn't have the time to dig into, and it's really difficult to predict how people will behave. But those things would need to be further evaluated.
Dan, is there, a lot of people who responded to the survey, and we've gotten a lot of feedback about the swim center in particular, and the impact of, the scenario 3 implications to that. Can we provide some clarification from your point of view about, I just want to make sure that everybody's clear whether or not, because we're using language like shutting down the swim center in this scenario and things like that. First and foremost, is that valid? Is that true under that scenario? And second of all, can we put maybe a frame around that?
Well, I mean, I think the conversations are coming about as we tried to model out. There's more scenario 2, because in scenario 3, after we did scenario 2, scenario 3 wasn't even worth, really, as Susan said, it just, scenario 2, some of the numbers were not. And the swim center in particular, because that was one of the facilities that did not cover exchangeable cost. So as we looked at what it would take to make it cover its changeable cost, so the swim center is primarily, it has membership revenue, some lessons, but it's primarily the home of the Clippers. So, as Lakey was pointing out early, there are 4 levers to pull. The swim center really has membership, but it's only a small portion. It's swim lessons and clippers. Those are their levers to pull to cover their changeable cost. So yes, so under scenario 2, if the board had decided that all those facilities stated have to cover their changeable cost, then it would be either increase the programming cost or not move forward with the facility, whatever facility that would be chosen. You have to, and so it was the 4 that didn't cover their changeable cost were the Art Center, Swim Center, Fairway Hills, and the Sports Park. And Sports Park and Fairway Hills were fairly close. The Art Center and the Swim Center were a little further away. And so they would have seen the biggest kind of changes in programming rates.
Yeah.
Can I add
Go ahead,
something
Lakey. I'm sorry.
Can I add something just to this general conversation? Obviously, because there's some pull apart here, right? We keep hearing outdoor pools, but the reality is part of the observation is, well, wait a second, the annual charge, so it's not free. And the annual charge would impact everyone, how many people use the pool, right? Again, it's all, as Dan was saying, I think Jenga is a good analogy. And so when I say complex, I certainly don't mean it's impossible to understand. It's truly a complex system. But one thing I did want to say, because one of the questions I get, right, as I'm out in the community is, okay, I don't like this idea, or I want to make sure my one program, this one thing I do is, I really love this program. I'd hate to see it go. So I think the answer is that is absolutely the kind of feedback that we're trying to get at this stage of the process. So the difference in this year is that we're trying to use these test cases to kind of demonstrate, and I love that trade-offs has come up. That's exactly 100% the whole goal of this exercise. If we push here, then we've got to pull here, and vice versa. And so instead of kind of baking this and having it come out in February when it's pretty close to done, and have people come to a board meeting and kind of give a testimonial, if you will, of, I really love this program. The goal here is to say, here's the kinds of things we'd have to do to make these moves. And so, if the feedback is, don't make a move that requires the annual charge to go up. If the answer is, outdoor pools, I want a voice. I'm not in the contingent that thinks they should be free to all. I think there are other facilities that are important. So I just want to be clear, because, I've got very engaged people. If you're here with me tonight, you are participating and engaged. So that's exactly the feedback we need. So as much as, ask clarifying questions, I don't think that, obviously you can say I don't like scenario 3 or something, but I think instead what you really want to try to get at is the pieces we're trying to demonstrate. And so if it is, outdoor pools don't have a value to me that equates with my annual charge going up, but I think we should have more accessibility. Why don't you try, as somebody mentioned, maybe a few pools are free and not every pool is free, right? There's other things, that we can kind of work through. So I just want to be clear on eliminating any frustration at this stage, that's the feedback that actually will help us shape that by the time we get to a draft budget, it should look like something that makes sense to hopefully the greatest number of people that it can, versus, having something be shaped and then come out and not have the flexibility to change it. And that's really why we're spending the time up front.
Thank you for that context, Lakey. We know we're coming up on this 90-minute mark, which seemed to be where we're at. We have quite a few questions left. Feel free, I just want to stress again that there are multiple ways you can get involved if you do need to drop off in the next few minutes. We are going to keep trying to answer as many questions as we can. And so if you need to go back and watch this on YouTube, again, this will be on YouTube. There's the survey at columbiaassociation.org/budget as well to voice your opinion and your priorities for the upcoming budget. So just a quick plug there before some people might have to drop off. Along this vein as well with facilities, and we got actually some survey feedback about this as well, of how we measure the value or effective investments. Somebody was asking about, use that term, you know, how do we decide if all 23 pools are truly an effective investment? Ray was wondering about usage and if certain facilities stand out more than others. So Dan, I'm assuming that's a you question. If you want to try to take some of that, I know I'm kind of painting a broad brush here, but how do we measure value of these facilities?
Oh, there's a lot of different ways. You know, we do track usage and program usage for all of our facilities that have check-in, but we also kind of count what we call our mass use program. So the ice rink, the hockey teams, and the skaters, and you know the clippers when they're at the pools. So we can get kind of an accurate overall participation of our facility. So we do measure that. We measure all of our programs on an individual level. You know, pre-pandemic, we would have 250,000 people take a group fitness class every year. You know, so you know, we measure tennis. We have 4,000. They're not unique participants. Some people play in multiple leagues, but playing in the USTA tennis leagues. 4,000 spots filled. So we look at participation, engagement. I thought I saw a question, maybe it was in the written ones. You know, we also do a quarterly survey to members who check into facilities, and we get a tremendous amount of feedback. Not only rating satisfaction, but giving opportunities for everyone to give us feedback. And we have the software that we use does a very deep analytic dive into all the verbatim, so that it pulls out and highlights the things that this is what people are talking about, and they tell us it's good or bad. We know. So you know, we have a lot of ways of collecting the information to look and see what people are valuing and what they're using.
Can I weigh in again?
By all means, everybody chime in.
You know, I
I'm just
always
here to deliver the questions.
tag
So,
on. But I think, again, well, one, I know Dennis is getting lonely because nobody wants to ask him a question. But he used to be in aquatics many, many years ago, and so maybe he could weigh in. But actually, this idea, I think it's important to capture this idea of what we're investing and how we know we're getting a return on it. And I just do want to point out, perhaps the obvious, but sometimes it's important to point it out because people do take it for granted. And that is, as you saw at the beginning, 19.3 million goes to our community operations. It goes to our land, it goes to our pathways, our parks, our plazas. And that doesn't count the capital investment, right? Which goes to both community operations and facilities for programs and services. And I think that that's another component that, you know, often we'll get these questions a little bit more very specifically around facilities. And what I've noticed is that we don't get them as much around, you know, our open land, our, you know, our pavilions, our tot lots. And I only point that out because, again, there's an intrinsic value there that is fully 100% underwritten by the annual charge, right? So there is no, well, I shouldn't say that. There's a few fees, I guess, Dennis, from the RV park and the dog park. So I shouldn't say none. But to be clear, I mean, of course, that's a massive asset. It's a huge piece of what people do think makes Columbia, Columbia. So I just want to point out that when we have these kind of intrinsic value or investment value conversations, it's important to, you know, kind of take the two sides of the coin that CA delivers, which is all of our open space and forested areas and our lakes and our ponds and our pathways and bridges and the actual programs and services in the facilities we run. And so as much as, of course, we're in budget, so we're going to talk about business model, I think that it's also so critical that because we're a nonprofit, that answer to investment and value is yet another complex, multifaceted answer. So, and plus, I didn't want Dennis to, feel left out.
Dennis, feel free to chime in if you would like to.
It wasn't many, many years ago that I ran aquatics.
I may or may not have come across an archives photo today, thanks to our wonderful archivist, Aaron Berry, from you signing up for a class at Supreme. We're going to have to broadcast that because it is good stuff. It is good stuff. Sorry to digress, everybody. Sorry, I'm looking through the questions to see if any of them kind of blend together. Now, Susan, somebody asked an interesting question. I want to make sure you clarify this one. So, according to, this was an anonymous attendee, somebody on here, said after fixed costs are counted, the budget only appears to have about $65,000 left over in variable costs. That gives the impression that the only way to grow or improve or update services is to either increase fees or charges or cut services. So can you please provide some clarity in that first? And then there are a couple questions about whether CA has an alternative plan to improve or grow, or how CA can improve without cutting services. So I know I threw a lot at you there, but that $65,000 left over, is that accurate, or how should people be interpreting that?
Yeah, so that was the result of a lot of assumptions about what is fixed, and what would be required. Some of those components are very easy, like insurance, like the property taxes and audit and interest. Those are very clear, and rent. Those things we know very clearly. But the others we had to make a lot of assumptions about. So there's always a refining of those assumptions, and there's always a stripping away, just getting to a further sort of bare bones model of support for the activities that would remain. Now, I think we really got to that level in the pandemic, in FY21, especially the first, from the first 8-9 months of the year, we were at a very bare bones model, but that did not support a lot of functions and activities that the community would like. So to grow, it's really, I don't think any organization has many options for growth other than expanding the programs and services that they provide for a fee. Either growth is either a volume or a rate component. It's really easy. It's a formula with two things. So you either increase your fees or you expand your programs and offerings for which you charge. Now, you could also reduce expenses, but I really feel we've demonstrated that we can do that, but it's painful for the community, and I don't think it would work in an attitude and an atmosphere of growth. You can't really you've got to invest something in order to, the services aren't free. You can't provide school age services, for example, without staff. So I think that person's right. It has to be growth of one of those two areas.
Just want to pause for a second to make sure nobody wants to add to that mix as I sift through some of the other questions here. Dan, there are a couple membership questions here that I'll try my best to kind of group together. Folks are wondering. Sorry, I'm just reading through I'm reading through anything that says membership, and there's quite a few. So, there are people wondering if we are looking at some different ways to craft our membership. Alex in particular asked if we'd be willing to consider some CA membership plan that only obligated people for the summer months rather than a year-long membership. I'll ask some other clarifying questions here if I can combine them, but I'll start with that one from Alex.
Well, we've talked about this, and a resident is more than happy to, we're more than happy to have them pay. But to put it in context, a brand new family of four, or a brand new family of four, or family, sorry, joining the Play membership is $480 a year for a resident. And for comparison, Forest Hills Club, which only has one pool, is $975 for the summer. For us, to have, the $480 covers the summer, but then we let you break it up over 12 payments, and we give you the other things combined with that. Or you could pay it all at once. I mean, but the rate on the pools for residents is already fairly low. It would be, if we gave a summer-only pool membership, it would still, after we're all said and done, it was still $480. It's $408 if you renew, if you're a current member and renew. Yeah, there wouldn't be any difference in the price.
Fair enough. Just voicing this, Joel, you were posing a question. I just am going to ask you for some clarification on your question about whether we could learn something from Howard County Parks and Recreation. If there's, if you wouldn't mind kind of just including in the Q&A, maybe a little bit of clarification to what you were looking for, that would be greatly appreciated. I apologize if I'm misreading something, maybe too much time with the screen today. Let's see here. In kind of going back, and I don't mean to kind of jump around here, but we were talking about accessibility, Lakey, you in particular, and Dan, maybe you could speak to this better than anyone. Somebody was wondering what has been done over the years to increase access to the pools for those who might not be able to afford it. And that actually resulted in increased access. I think that might be interesting to explore maybe in the future as well.
Well, number one, primarily our income qualified program, which offers 50% off those qualified memberships. That's a well-used program and a great opportunity for people to have accessibility. We've done discounted rates on some pools during the week when they're not busy. It's kind of in line with, I saw somebody suggested. We've done that. Currently, we have the second Sunday swim where anyone with a Columbia card can use the pools for the weekend or for Sunday. So there are various things that we've tried and used to increase accessibility.
Awesome. Everybody, I know there's a few others here, and I'm just trying to find a way to kind of pull the thread back to the discussion that we're having today. So I apologize if I'm just kind of staring at the question, and I don't mean to ignore it. I'm just trying to make sure we put it in the context of what's going on and what we're trying to discuss today. So,
Dannika,
go ahead.
I just want to jump in, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the CA Points program.
Yeah.
Where we work with many local schools where students can earn a free membership. Thanks for Susan for reminding me. It's a great program that we have that has tremendous participation.
And I guess I'll just tag on as a closure of that, I think the question was positing two things, right? What have we done? But I just want to clearly state, can we consider doing more? Can we consider doing something different? Yes. And that is what we should be doing in this budget process. Is it all the way to, quote unquote, free pools for residents? I don't know. Can we do more than what we're doing today? Absolutely. And so I just want to be very clear on that.
Dennis, by golly, we have an open space comment and question. Here we go.
Yeah, Coach.
And yeah, you could, what, this might honestly also have a Susan component. I apologize, but somebody just wanted to give open space the well-deserved credit of it being a valuable asset in Columbia and worth every penny. However, this anonymous attendee is pointing out there's a lot of competing priorities, and you know, they are making the inference that open space is the thing that gets cut first. So I want to make sure that we either dispel that or affirm that. And
So
then
what
go
I
ahead.
would say, so I was, during the pandemic was awful. We lost, we as employees, we had to let go. It was just awful. Employees worked at reduced pay in uncertain conditions, but I feel extremely hopeful now. We're coming back from that. We're going to be fully employed. It's amazing how many people are out in the open space. And I like to say, I have 95% participation with Columbia residents. They're everywhere. And it's just an incredibly hopeful time for us. And, the things that are getting people out in the open space, engaging with residents and volunteer programs, we're not cutting back. And I go out at least once or twice a week and look, and there are continual improvements, many times made by team members on their own. And I'd like to say it's a remarkable process. We're still, coming up out of it, but we're not cutting back.
So the second part of this that I think is worth mentioning, and I'm going to quote it first, and then I think maybe translate it a little bit. And it's, can CA do anything to shield its budget from the poaching when there are competing priorities in other departments? So they're speaking to open space being so valuable that they want to make sure that it is not being taken away from with these other competing priorities. So I will plug that, first of all, this is exactly the kind of prioritizing we want to hear from the community. So I appreciate, this comment, and I'm sure everybody here does, to hear that this is at the top of this individual's list, and I'm sure a lot of others. So Dennis, how do you feel? Maybe this is a chance for you to voice your thoughts of how you feel going into these scenarios in this beginning part of the process as we make our way through this budget from your perspective.
So to start with, the open space was fully funded in every scenario. We started with the premise that open space was that important; it had to be fully funded. So there were no cutbacks in open space. Just and there was no pushback from. There's never been any pushback from board members, from CA presidents, both past and present. And we're not. I wouldn't say we're heavy in staff, but I have the right number of people to get the job done. And we're continually making improvements out in the open space. And we love seeing people out there. I love engaging with residents. I was on a call last night where someone told me he wanted to start a volunteer adopt a tot lot program. And if you could borrow a pressure washer. So people absolutely, I see it every day. People love the open space. The team members we have here are fully engaged. In my mind, there's no one more important than open space and community operations. I know there are some competing priorities in Columbia Association, but that has never been a problem.
That's awesome.
So Dannika, could I jump in on that?
You better believe it. Absolutely.
So I think two things to add to that. And one is just look at the capital budget that's proposed for the scenarios. It's so that most of it is open space support projects. So there's very little that is even a reinvestment in the other facilities and buildings. And when those projects are specifically called out, it's HVAC, it's major maintenance. So I think that's a very clear indicator. If you just want some data. And that was true last year as well, and so I think that would be helpful. And then also, I can say from seeing the budget in or these scenarios in their totality, that really open space is the only part of the organization that is back to pre-pandemic levels at 100%. So the others are still ramping back up if that ever happens. So just wanted to add that context.
Appreciate that. So I did get a little nudge from someone who had asked a question earlier, so I will do my best. I'm just going to read it verbatim and open the floor to this one. As we start to wind down, I just want to keep an eye on the clock and make sure we're respecting everybody's time here. Was there consideration of the regressive nature of number 3 that imposes higher fees on those who already struggle to pay their annual charge, so that others with resources can use a pool, quote, for free. So again, I want to open up, you know, to anybody, again, reading
I'll
that one
feel that.
verbatim.
I'll feel that. I think that's
Absolutely.
absolutely, you know, a fair observation. So was it considered? Again, we were posed to test what would need to happen. The annual charge was the source that, from an economic business model, made the most sense. And I think that's actually a really good way to be in this conversation, to say, again, what is the intent? What is the intent of positing that question? If the intent is, which is generally what I think it is, but again, it's my interpretation, how can we make pools more accessible? How can we make sure people that haven't had access or don't feel welcome to have access, we can do better at that. And there are different ways to do it. Is it increasing some of what Dan already touched on that we do? Is it doing something different? I think that those are questions that are absolutely the questions to be asking during the budget process, so that we don't put something forward that has a very different impact than perhaps what is actually the intent of the idea. So I think this is exactly the place to be teasing out those observations. And I just want to clearly say, I think that's a fair observation. And often what happens is something ends up being regressive because it ends up being a greater proportion of someone's payment than another person's payment, even though it's technically an equal amount, right? So that's the whole equity versus equality that, you know, I think as a community service organization, we have to always be conscious of and prioritizing and make sure that we have a real understanding of the situation and not just kind of doing something out of perhaps a goodwill, but not really following through the impact. So fair observation. I think it pushes us to ask the right questions, which I welcome from the community. And, you know, if that is how you feel, I think voicing that, you know, which you have done tonight, if this person has or taken the survey, you know, please include that kind of commentary as well.
Awesome. So perhaps, and I think we'll wrap up with one more question here. And Joel, I'm going to give it my best stab. Is just, I'll open up the floor if there is someone or some organization or some partner that we have looked to, been inspired by, you know, tried to glean some inspiration from as we move in even further into this post-COVID world. And you know, any thoughts there? Joel, I did my best. I apologize if that wasn't the essence of your question.
Well, given that I've been here 6 months and only been during the pandemic, I can make some observations. I don't know if anybody else wants to weigh in. I think one thing, and this actually has come up in an employee forum I did recently, that I do think is important for residents to understand as well. All of us across the senior team both, you know, come in with and have professional networks that we flex and that we check into. And certainly with the kind of complex operations we have across the organization, I think that we have utilized those. Anybody that has any connection anywhere is utilizing those during COVID-19. In a more formal way, several of us are in industry-specific leadership groups that actually purposefully put us in contact with people in similar roles, often in different parts of the country, to really understand just the dynamics of the industry in different components. Well, in COVID-19, that was really helpful in some ways, and in other ways, there's such a local and even hyper-local impact. But I will generally say that even in the time that I've been here, there are absolutely other community partners that I have started to connect to that I think are doing a very good job. And so that question kind of comes in two ways, right? Kind of safety protocols and health in a physical sense, but also the mental health component. And then lastly, really, are we filling the gap in services in the kinds of programs people need at this time, perhaps in a greater time of need? So I think all of those are ways that we connect and are continuing to connect. In particular, I think I might have seen, it might have been this question, but Howard County, we government, we connect to them in different departments kind of across the organization. I know we worked very closely also with obviously the Department of Public Health, during all of the COVID protocols. We do have a medical advisor on staff that is connected regionally and has been a resource for us in decision making, but has also been a resource to employees, and we even did a public forum as well. And then I would say that there are several other community service nonprofits that we either have connected to or are reconnecting to that I think have done some pretty impressive things about how can we step into the gap at a time. So to Susan's earlier point, and Dennis as well, as much as such hard decisions were made and cuts were made, we've had an amazing team that felt a direct connection to serving this community. And please remember, most of my team in terms of numbers were in the field or on site last spring, way before we had vaccines. Uncertain, I think, is the word that Dennis used. So I think that, that dedication comes through, and individual employees have filled that gap, which, obviously we don't want to under-resource, and that's why we're reallocating that budget going forward. But otherwise, I think it's also important to understand that so many of our employees are in and of Columbia, and I think that connection to the mission really is part of what, frankly, we have other entities talking to us about. How do you keep people so engaged? How do you make sure that they're staying? And again, that's always balance, because it's not, it's a lot of factors that go into that. But I think we do a pretty good job at staying plugged in, more nationally, regionally, and then I'm proud to say that even in the short time, I can see how we are a resource for other organizations across the region as well.
Awesome. Thank you all for your questions. Wow, we covered a good amount of ground there. And again, apologies if we didn't get to your question or if you feel like it wasn't adequately answered. I have posted my email in the chat. Please feel free to send me a note or participate in that survey. That's really a great way to voice your priorities. And we hopefully made it a little simple with some prompts and things like that. So check it out if you haven't already. Lakey, I believe you have a few closing thoughts before we wrap things up.
Yes, and I will make this quick. Hopefully I'll be much quicker in the screen. Okay, everybody see that? Yes, okay. So I just want to do a quick summary. In a lot of ways, I think we've touched on this, but I think it's kind of, with such a wide-ranging discussion and so many parts and pieces that we're dealing with, we've gone over the complexity, we've gone over the trade-offs. I just want to be clear, a budget is not just about the business model, right? A budget is in so many ways a manifestation of your values and priorities as an organization. And that is why it's so important that we engage directly with the community we serve to make sure we're getting that right. So I challenge you to make sure we're asking the right questions. I challenge you to make sure that you're asking us questions and hold us accountable. But I think that's really kind of where we're going in the process. So we're in the scenario test cases, which is really about, what are some of the estimated details and assumptions and visibility. We're now in the stage of hearing from the community about priorities. Dannika just said, I want to strongly echo, please engage with us around that. And then it's really kind of the movement to the CA board that starts to set the stage for staff on, based on what we've heard from the community, based on what we've kind of figured out from all this information in the test cases, here's the kind of outcomes we want to see next fiscal year. And then we really push forward as staff, and again, our very dedicated and talented budget team and management across all the departments to a real draft budget and recommendations. I think what I want to make sure of is that as we're kind of framing those decisions, the kinds of questions which, you know, I'm excited several of our residents asked us tonight, but it's really, what does CA do that is valuable and valued by the community? Again, what do we do that helps make Columbia, Columbia? And of course, we have to be considering how are we positioning for the future. So this last is just a summary. Again, you've seen the schedule. You're here tonight. You certainly saw it at some point. We did decide we're going to keep the online survey open through Monday. We originally were going to close it today. So tomorrow, you know, particularly if you have neighbors that miss this celebrating Diwali, or, you know, if you're you know, now watching it, I think that the key is make sure all your neighbors know. Make sure everyone you know knows that they can take this survey. We made it very simple, very straightforward. It's really about priorities. It's rankings. It's not terribly long to take. It's giving us very valuable information. I have been thrilled by the participation so far, and I want to commit that we will use this information. You will hear us talk about it and reflect it back to our board of directors. We will absolutely use it as guideposts. And again, we'll be coming back to you in January. Stay tuned for the board meetings. Again, they're always both live streamed as well as recorded, so you can go back at a later time and, you know, check out the portions that you want to dig in on. Dannika mentioned earlier, you can see it on the slide, columbiaassociation.org/budget. We will continue to populate that. We will, you know, it's where you can get the link to the online survey. You know, it was the registration for tonight. We'll continue to post materials as we move through the process. Our goal is transparency, engagement, and really making sure that we're aligned with the community around priorities and where we're moving for the next fiscal year. So thank you so much for everybody that is here tonight. And Dannika will, you know, wrap us up and close us out. But I just want to sincerely say thank you for your time and attention, and very, very much gratitude for the feedback and particularly the survey. You know, it's quick, but it's so valuable for us to get that insight. So thanks.
So for those of you left standing, I did just launch a quick poll. I know quite a few people had to duck out. That's okay. But scale of 1 to 10, go ahead and let us, or excuse me, 1 to 5, let us know how valuable the information was tonight. And we will certainly, again, use that in our reflection as well. Check the YouTube page, our CA YouTube page for this posted, if you want to share it with friends or neighbors who weren't able to make it tonight. Other than that, again, like Lakey said, check back for more information. I, again, put my email address in the chat if needed. I want to personally thank all the panelists who came out tonight and took their time, and thank you all who took your valuable time in the evening. We'll see you next time, and at the very least, see you in January. And again, I would be remiss, board meetings coming up here as well. Make sure that you tap into those. Dick, I promised you that I would make that mention, and there it is. So make sure to tap into those as well. Plug in where you can, and make sure your voice is heard on this. Thank you all so much. Have a great evening.
Good night.